story recapped here. Today I'm going to explain a horror and thriller film called Don't Answer the Phone. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. In Los Angeles, Kirk Smith ties a stocking around his neck as he stands before a crucifix. He then raises his hands as if he's praising God, taking deep breaths as he looks at himself in the mirror. Meanwhile, a nurse returns home from work one night and receives a call from her mother, who says her Aunt Sophie is back home. However, after they talk, the nurse is attacked and violated by Kirk, whose face is covered with a stocking. Then, the next day, Kirk drives around the neighborhood while listening to the news on the radio about a crazy killer who preys on women and prowls the streets. After that, Kirk approaches a woman in the street and tells her he's a photographer, asking if he can take her picture. He also gives the lady his card, but the woman soon leaves when her boyfriend shows up. At the same time, a psychologist, Dr. Lindsay Gale, starts her radio show and gives advice to her listeners. Upon hearing this, Kirk uses a payphone to call the doctor, faking a Spanish accent and introducing himself as Ramon. Dr. Gale asks Kirk how he is since they already talked about his fake illness the previous week, so Kirk assures her he's better now. Then, Kirk states that the answer to his problems is a nurse, a real good woman, but Dr. Gale thinks otherwise. Dr. Gale also asks Kirk how the nurse feels about his situation, but Kirk gets upset and ends the call. Concurrently, Lieutenant McCabe investigates the nurse's death and collects evidence in her apartment with Sergeant Hatcher and a lab man. The lab man then informs Hatcher that the lady was violated in every way possible, adding that he has a skin sample of the culprit underneath the nurse's fingernails. The lab man also has 6 strands of hair from the culprit's head and some from his private area. After talking to the lab man, Hatcher asks McCabe if the candy wrapper they found was similar to the ones discovered at the other crime scenes. However, McCabe is too busy scrutinizing a piece of burnt cardboard from a film box in the ashtray, so he doesn't answer his partner's question. Then, he instructs a cop to look around for a camera before examining the nurse's body. As McCabe looks for evidence, he notices that the stocking left by the culprit is tied in a particular way. So Hatcher says that it's Oriental style, which is popular with an armed Vietnamese organization. However, Hatcher can't figure out what the coin is for, but McCabe explains that it helped the culprit twist the stocking and control the woman. Because of that, they deduce that they might be dealing with a Vietnam veteran. Meanwhile, Kirk lifts heavy weights to become stronger. In her clinic, one of Dr. Gale's patients, Carol, reveals how her father used to touch her. Unfortunately, Carol had to give her father what he wanted just to avoid conflicts, admitting that she always goes out of her way to avoid arguments. So Dr. Gale tells her she must learn to assert herself, saying she has a right to express what she feels. After Carol's session with Dr. Gale, Kirk follows the woman and breaks into her house. Once again, Kirk makes sure to cover his face with a stocking before coming at Carol, mocking the poor woman and talking to her as if he's her father. Then, he picks up Carol and lays her on the bed, where he restrains her with a rope before pouring wax on her body. Sadly, all Carol can do is cry in pain while Kirk laughs and enjoys hearing her suffer. The next day, the detectives discuss the probability of having a killer with a confused sense of religious values. Based on the latest killing, they think the culprit sees himself acting out certain purifying and cleansing rituals with Carol. They also describe the strangler as paranoid, obsessive, psychotic, and schizophrenic, which can probably be attributed to an important early figure in his life, most likely a dominant female. At the same time, McCabe instructs each member of the Strangler task force on what to do to catch the killer faster. Later on, McCabe questions Dr. Gale about Carol, wondering if he can see the woman's file. However, the doctor informs McCabe he needs to obtain a court order first, before saying Carol was a withdrawn girl with no family or nuptial ties. Unfortunately, that pisses McCabe off, because he wants to get the killer off the streets as soon as possible, and he thinks the doctor is wasting time by demanding a court order. Despite that, Dr. Gale blames McCabe, and says she thinks individuals with a mentality like his are responsible for creating troubled people like the Strangler. Disappointed, McCabe shows Dr. Gale the court order he's been carrying and asks her to give him Carol's files immediately. Meanwhile, Kirk continues to look for his next target and successfully brings home a beautiful woman named Sue Ellen, under the pretense of taking her photos. Sue Ellen is happy to be Kirk's model, and she doesn't suspect him even when he makes her wear a thick leather belt and restrains her hands. Then, Kirk reveals an altar and suddenly takes off Sue Ellen's jacket before strangling her with a stocking. The following day, the authorities find Sue Ellen's body and realize that the strangler likes to use a stalking from the last woman he killed. At the same time, Kirk weeps uncontrollably after killing Sue Ellen. In her clinic, Dr. Gale talks to another patient, Lisa, who has a substance problem. They then try a simple exercise to make Lisa understand that using substances will do her no good, and the doctor can only hope that her patient will be able to help herself. At the police station, McCabe greets a psychic, who immediately notices that the detective isn't thrilled he's there. So the psychic starts talking about McCabe's ex-wife to show he's not a charlatan, before asking for Sue Ellen's photos. Then, once he touches one of the woman's pictures, the psychic says the culprit is a big man with short curly hair. He also describes how the strangler used a stalking with a coin while violating Sue Ellen before taking her picture. Sadly, despite everything the psychic told them, McCabe still finds it hard to believe the guy. Later on, Kirk submits his photos to an agency owner, Sam, who asks for more pictures of pretty girls. As it turns out, he's a talented photographer, so Sam pays him well for his work. Then, Kirk stalks more women, and he is soon approached by a call girl, Denise, so they get a private room across the street, where Kirk instructs Denise to call Dr. Gale after doing the deed. Denise introduces herself to Dr. Gale and talks to the psychologist about her profession. Denise says she's happy with her life, and then she tells the doctor that one of her clients asked to call her. Denise reveals that the man is with her now, and her client claims he always talks to Dr. Gale about his headaches. Unfortunately, Kirk strangles Denise while she's talking to Dr. Gale, before asking the doctor if she heard everything. Meanwhile, Denise's handler, Adkins, follows her and gets into a physical fight with Kirk, but Kirk eventually knocks him unconscious and leaves. After talking to Denise, Dr. Gale visits McCabe and Hatcher at the station and tells them what happened during her radio show. Since all calls are recorded, Dr. Gale gives them a tape of her conversation with Denise and describes what she heard before the call ended. She also hands them a copy of her conversation with a man she believes to be Ramon, saying she thinks he's the one who killed Denise. Determined to help the detectives, Dr. Gale informs them that on Ramon's first 2 calls, he complained of severe headaches, brief blackouts, and other symptoms of someone who has scar tissue on the brain. Dr. Gale says it could cause uncontrollable urges to kill, so McCabe asks if seizures like that are easily triggered. Dr. Gale then replies that it wouldn't be unusual, and gives him examples of what could trigger the strangler to kill. With no time to waste, Hatcher decides to run a voice print on the tapes to see if they match. Then, McCabe suggests putting a stakeout at the doctor's clinic, but Dr. Gale refuses and says her patients might get scared if they see cops outside her workplace. However, McCabe still insists on having a squad car cruise the radio station and Dr. Gale's house. Moments later, McCabe and Hatcher confirm that the strangler killed Denise based on the whole MO and other evidence. Hatcher also points out that the culprit is a substance user since substances were found on the premises. However, it bothers Hatcher that they got 3 different blood types in the room where Denise was killed, making him think that the woman's handler was also there. So they immediately search for Adkins and talk to Winky, who tells them where to find the handler in exchange for $5. Eventually, the detectives find Adkins in a massage parlor, but the guy pulls a gun and shoots at them. However, Adkins is no match for McCabe and Hatcher, and he only ends up getting shot and killed. Unfortunately, the detectives lose their only lead, which means they're back to square one. Meanwhile, Kirk pretends to talk to his deceased father about what he did to Adkins. Kirk brags about easily subduing the guy, showing how arrogant he is. At the same time, he insults Adkins for coming at him, saying he made a big mistake. That night, McCabe goes to Lisa's place after receiving a call and learning that she plans to jump off a rooftop. However, Dr. Gale is already there to urge Lisa to think twice, saying she's got her whole life ahead of her. Then, McCabe talks to Lisa and eventually convinces her to calm down, and Dr. Gale can't help but hug her patient. After that, McCabe instructs his colleague to take Lisa to the hospital. He then asks Dr. Gale to join him for a drink, and the two happily talk about their lives. As the night deepens, Dr. Gale and McCabe continue to get to know each other, and they soon sleep together. The following day, Kirk shows up at the house of his next target, a beautiful blonde woman. Kirk claims he was sent by the woman's friend to do her portfolio, but the lady says she wasn't informed about it. So Kirk asks her if he can use her phone to talk to her friend to straighten things out, and once inside the house, he just pretends to make a call. Seconds later, the woman becomes upset upon seeing one of Kirk's indecent photos. Then, she asks Kirk to leave, but the big guy suddenly removes her robe and starts violating her. He also strangles her to keep her from screaming, but the woman's friend comes out and hits Kirk with a lamp to stop him. Unfortunately, Kirk comes at her instead and insults her before strangling her. Meanwhile, the women's landlady shows up and knocks on the door. forcing Kirk to flee. Concurrently, McCabe and Hatcher examine Kirk's photos he accidentally left at the blonde woman's apartment. They then realize they're dealing with a professional photographer, and they can't wait to develop the film inside the guy's camera. After that, they visit Sam's agency, where Kirk usually sells his pictures. Luckily, Sam tells them those pictures belong to Kirk Smith, and he also gives the detectives his address. Later that night, the detectives go to Kirk's apartment, but Hatcher is reluctant to search the place since they have no warrant. So instead of breaking into the apartment, Hatcher finds another way to get inside and opens the door for McCabe. At the same time, Dr. Gale thanks the detectives who came to check on her. Unfortunately, she doesn't know that someone's in the house with her. As the detectives search Kirk's place, they don't find any indecent pictures around. Then, McCabe starts to feel that something's wrong, but his conversation with Hatcher gets interrupted when a man suddenly enters the apartment. They immediately order the man to get down on his knees, and as Hatcher frisks him, McCabe informs him of his rights. However, they soon realize they got the wrong guy when they see the man's ID and open a suitcase containing kids' toys. Disappointed, McCabe tells the man they're looking for a photographer. Fortunately, the man knows there's a photographer next door, saying he's a weird fellow. So McCabe apologizes to the man and quickly leaves with Hatcher to catch Kirk. At home, Dr. Gale changes her clothes and remains unaware that she isn't alone. Meanwhile, the detectives finally reach Kirk's apartment and find all the evidence they need to nail the guy, including the stalking with a coin. Of course, Hatcher can't help but feel excited that they're so close to catching the strangler. Back at Dr. Gale's place, the psychologist immediately tries to call the cops when she finds a stalking with a coin in a room. However, the phone line is dead, and Dr. Gale gets scared when the power suddenly goes out. Then, she attempts to flee, but Kirk catches her and ties her to a chair. At the same time, the detectives realize that Kirk is after Dr. Gale when they discover several pictures of her in the apartment. So McCabe instructs Hatcher to check out the clinic and radio station while he goes to the doctor's house. As Dr. Gale tries to cooperate with Kirk, she finally learns the strangler's real name. Then, she tries talking to Kirk to see if he'll open up to her, but the man only makes her understand how deeply disturbed he is. Kirk also tells Dr. Gale there's nothing she can do to help him before gagging her to stop her from talking. Moments later, McCabe finally arrives and immediately goes inside Dr. Gale's house, where Kirk attacks him. The two men engage in a physical fight, but McCabe eventually manages to shoot Kirk and cuff him. Then, McCabe helps Dr. Gale and unties her, unaware that Kirk has managed to break his handcuffs. Although he's wounded, Kirk comes at McCabe and tries to strangle him, but the detective pushes him away and shoots him. McCabe has no intention of letting Kirk go, so he repeatedly shoots the strangler until he dies and falls into the swimming pool. Then, McCabe looks at Kirk's body as it floats in the water, relieved that everything is finally over.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.